This What's Working with Cam Marston podcast is brought to you courtesy of Michelob Ultra Beer.
They say consistency is the key to success. They weren't wrong. So how about grabbing a beer that's consistently smooth, consistently refreshing, and consistently light? You might just find that the road to success can be pretty enjoyable. Michelob Ultra, the perfect balance of taste and refreshment, and only 2.6 carbs and 95 calories. It's only worth it if you enjoy it. Enjoy responsibly. Anheuser-Busch Michelob Ultra Light Beer, St. Louis, Missouri.
Welcome, everyone, to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston. Nice to have you along. Thank you so much for tuning in. What's Working is the show designed to bring you workplace, workforce, and marketplace trends shaping the workplace, the workforce, and marketplace around us. I try to find guests who will teach us something, give us some sort of insight, tell us some sort of story that we can utilize and apply to our own world, our own lives, whatever it may be, our own workplace primarily, and make each of us just a little bit better at whatever it is that we do. Again, welcome. Thank you for joining me along for yet another episode of What's Working. What's Working is brought to you by the Alabama Center for Real Estate, housed in the Culverhouse College of Business, all housed at the University of Alabama. A number of times on the show in the past, I've introduced my guests to my listener. I'll stop and say to the guest, hang on, I want you to know who's tuning in. And I think it's a good way to connect my guests to imagine who's listening out there. And my listener is if you're a regular listener, you've heard me say this before, generally is going to be a male, 45 years old or older, in an influencer position in his business. And that is certainly not always the case. I'm happy to say I have a great number of female fans out there who are great listeners to the show, great fans. But primarily, 70 some odd % of my listeners, as I've tried to gather the research, tend to be male. Today's guest is outside of that range. In fact, it's less of a business focus and more of a marketplace trends focus. Gabriella Saab. Gabriella Saab is an author, and I had her in the studio about a year ago talking about her book at that time called The Last Checkmate. And this time, she's talking about her next book, which will be released early next year, January the 24th. And I think it's interesting to listen to the perspective of a young lady who is really doing quite well in the publishing industry. Everybody, and it's kind of a long-standing joke or a long-standing meme within our society, is each one of us feels like we have the great American novel inside of us. Very few of us actually try to do it. Very few of us actually pick up a pen, metaphorically speaking, or more literally sit down in front of a computer and try to write that. She did, and it had great success, and she continues to do it. Her publisher has re-upped and wants this next book, and I learned in our upcoming interview that she's got a third book cooking right now, working on the next one to follow this one, with something a little bit more personal, which actually really excites me. But when we talk about trends regarding Gabriella and the world that she's in, is the female protagonist in historical fiction. We've seen this pendulum swing this way, not only in literature, but in our workplaces as well, as the diversity, equity, inclusion conversations continue to rise up and become a big part of conversations within the corporate groups. I tell you, it's not very many corporate groups that I work with that don't have some sort of DEI conversation with me prior to beginning my work with them, just to let me know that this is all very important to them. Gabriella, whether it's a part of the DEI world or not, has found the female protagonist historical fiction genre and is doing very well. Her colleagues are all in that world as well. I find her, as you'll soon hear and probably agree, a fascinating individual with an extraordinary work ethic. And I know I'm belaboring the point here. You're saying, hey, stop talking about it. Stop the preamble and get her on the show. I will in one more moment. I find her a fascinating individual with an extraordinary work ethic who in a year's time, after having an extraordinary amount of success with her book, The Last Checkmate, is still a nice, lovely, easy to talk to, gracious and grateful individual. Refreshing to see somebody who's landed on so much success, not, from what I've seen, not changed by it. Absolutely glorious. Let's get her in the studio right after this break and begin to learn a little bit about her upcoming novel. What's Working is brought to you by the Alabama Center for Real Estate, housed in the Culverhouse College of Business at the University of Alabama. They are our presenting sponsor and have been in that role nearly the entire year. I don't show nearly as much gratitude to them as I should on this show. I hope they know how important they are. You can find us online in social media worlds. I'm going to go ahead and plug that before we go to break. Find me on Facebook, Instagram. I even have a TikTok page, which I never use, but I'm out there. Twitter as well. And most importantly, go to the website, what'sworkingcam.com or cammarston.com. I'd love to hear from you directly. Let me know what you think. Send me your ideas. Give me your feedback. Email me directly at cam@cammarston.com. Going to break, coming out of the break in the studio with Gabriella Saab. My sponsor, Get the Tea, is having their annual holiday sale. You won't want to miss it. When you purchase 2 months of their tea, you'll get 1 month for free. It's available in 3 flavors: natural, peppermint, my favorite, or pomegranate. Save $35. Their teas and supplements are sourced from the purest ingredients available, especially this time of year when you'll be around so many cookies. You'll want to make sure that your digestive system is intact. So why not now? Don't take your health for granted. It's now o'clock. Go to getthetea.com, enter code CAM5, that's CAM5, to receive an additional $5 off your order. That's getthetea.com, code CAM5.
This is Trey Langus with Transworld Business Advisors. I help business owners sell their businesses from mom and pop size to large mergers and acquisitions. We have a huge buyer database looking for quality businesses to buy right now. Confidentiality guaranteed. If you're a business owner considering an exit within the next few years, let's talk. Again, I'm Trey Langus. Find me at Transworld Business Advisors or Google my name.
We're back. You're listening to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston. What's Working is brought to you by the Alabama Center for Real Estate, housed in the Culverhouse College of Business, all housed in the University of Alabama. Back in the studio today with Gabriella Saab. It was about a year ago that she and I were together, and I'd been referred to her based on a book that she wrote, and a friend of mine read it and said, you need to have her on the air. She's local. And I reached out. She came in. I read the book prior to her coming in, and since then, her career seems to have exploded. She's all in the world that I'm involved in, particularly on social media. She's out there meeting and doing things that I guess any author would love to do. Gabriella, thank you so much for coming back. Welcome back to What's Working.
Thank you, Cam. Thank you for having me. I'm so glad to be back.
I'm holding in my hand the new book, the galley copy called Daughters of Victory, of the book called Daughters of Victory. It's your newest one, coming out in January. The previous one was The Last Checkmate. Tell us about Daughters of Victory.
So Daughters of Victory is a story of revolutionary and resistance women in the Russian Revolution and World War II Soviet Union. It is essentially about the ties of family being interrupted by the tragedy of war. So we first meet a young woman who is a former aristocrat in revolutionary time Russia, so about 1917, 1918. And she leaves her aristocratic family to join this revolution that's brewing and that's starting in her city of Moscow. And then ultimately gets arrested and politically imprisoned and then freed later, about 10 years later, when the Tsar is overthrown. So she returns to this cause that she has, thrown herself into so passionately. But in the meantime is trying to reconnect with the daughter that she left when she went to prison. And then we jump forward about 30 some odd years to the 1940s, and we pick up in the Soviet Union during World War II in a very remote little village in what is currently Belarus. And we meet a young woman who is the first woman's granddaughter. And so this young woman from Leningrad is moving to this little village to live with this grandmother that she's never met, to flee ahead of the Nazi siege. And while she's there, she kind of has that same little rebellious streak that her grandmother has. And when the Nazis invade the village, she is very tempted by the resistance. And so we kind of see these two women and their two lives playing off each other. And the matriarch of the family is seeing how her granddaughter is responding to these threats in a very similar way, and basically kind of wants to protect her from everything that's going on.
So the last book was historical fiction based on a female protagonist. There was an arch enemy in the book, and the culmination of the book towards the end was between these two. Is it a similar format in this book?
It's sort of. I love playing with timeline and structure. I think that's so much fun and makes for such a fun reading experience. So the way this one works is you open at a very pivotal moment in the first character. Her name is Svetlana, in her life, the revolutionary. And then we flash back to how she got there. And so we alternate points of view. So you have a series of chapters from Svetlana's point of view, and then a series of chapters from Mila, her granddaughter's point of view. So we are moving back and forth between the timelines until eventually they merge.
Interesting. So these two different timelines, is that the artistic side of you coming out, or is there an editor saying, hey, here's the way we need to do this to make this book more marketable? How much of this book is written and created for buyers versus you as the artist wanting to create it that way?
It's definitely me, but then there is a marketing piece to it as well. Because the market is so inundated with World War II type stories, you do want to find ways to make yours different and make it stand out. And so I like to do that a lot through structure, because not every book is going to be nonlinear. And if it is nonlinear, there are so many different ways to do that. So I have a lot of fun with it.
And do your editors get involved with that along the way to say, hey, you've kind of gone off the reader can't follow at this point or something like that? They reel you in?
They can sometimes. For the most part, they've kind of let me just have at it, which has been great. But if there gets to be a point where they're like, okay, we've been away from this, point of view for too long, maybe throw a few of those chapters in here so the reader, doesn't totally forget what's going on there. They'll say things like that. But for the most part, they kind of let me do my thing.
The first book, The Last Checkmate, give me an update on it. Do you have sales numbers? Do you have languages and anything like that would tell us a little bit about how that book is going? From everything I can see, it's just been a huge success. The reviews are fantastic. Tell me about it.
It's been incredible. Honestly, the response has been so overwhelming and just crazy. And what we talk about in the industry is earning out, and that means you earned out your advance, and so you're making royalties on top of that. It earned out within the first 2 months, and I got a royalty check after those first 2 months on the shelves, which was crazy. I think it's in about 15 countries at this point, and I'm still getting people reading the book and reviewing the book and reaching out to me and telling me, they read it and they loved it, or read it for their book club or whatever the case may be. And so, especially now that we're more than a year out of since publication, like that is just crazy, because you never know how long a book is going to have a life. It might, do well in the first few months and then die on the shelf. And I've been very fortunate that so far we seem to be doing all right.
Are you tired of talking about it yet?
I'm really not, honestly. I thought I would be. And I guess toward the end of publicity, I kind of was getting tired of it because, it gets to be repetitive after a certain amount of time. But I'll always love that book and those characters, and I do love talking about it.
I remember us talking about you writing that book, female protagonist. You did an extraordinary amount of research. There were people, I want to say, in Poland who are very generous with their time in helping you. You even traveled to Poland to do some firsthand research, to walk the grounds of which you wrote about in the book. What did you learn in the process of writing the first book, that you maybe changed or refined or wrapped your arms around in the second book and said, I've got to make sure this continues? What's changed?
I definitely think I've gotten a lot stricter about my process, because with The Last Checkmate, I had the idea and I'd done some general research, but I was sort of writing and researching at the same time as I was drafting. And I realized that I need kind of a more solid foundation. So for this book, I did all the heavy research up front, all the plotting, all the, outlines and all those character development, everything like that on the front end. And so then that still leaves me room for the story to grow and to change and develop as I write, but I have a more solid foundation. So I have the bones of the story a little more solidly in place, but then I still have that creative freedom to take the story where it needs to go and where it tells me it needs to go.
So when artists who draw, let's say some of the Renaissance artists, for example, you can find sketches that they did as they tried to perfect the image of God on the Sistine Chapel. Mm-hmm. And Michelangelo tried to do it a couple of different ways, and these are treasures, of course, right now, but you realize he was practicing for what would ultimately go on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Do you do anything similar? Do you write art backgrounds on your characters that are never included in the book? Do you kind of write scenes that are never included in the book in order to kind of to practice how this is ultimately going to do?
I definitely do. I do a lot of that. And I do a lot of just that development work because it helps me get to know the character so much more. So I have all these worksheets essentially of their weaknesses and their needs and their, strengths.
Is this handwritten or is it typed out? How formal is it?
I do a mixture. So usually I'll take notes by hand just because I learned that note taking is the way I learn best. So if I'm reading research, I will take notes either by hand or typing. The character development work I'll usually type out unless I'm, somewhere out in public and I don't have a computer and I happen to have a notebook or something. But then definitely backgrounds, scenes of their life or of scenes that we hear about in the book but don't necessarily get on the page. I'll write those, or I'll write certain scenes from different characters' perspectives to kind of get in their head at the scene, even if they're not the point of view character in that scene, and just anything where I feel like I need to get closer to them to understand them.
So do you do word counts? How many words is Daughters of Victory? Daughters of Victory,
I think we ended up capping out about 125,000 words, give or take.
Is it safe to say you've written 20% more than that in the writing of this book?
Oh, yeah. It has grown and shrunk and grown again. And so I think when I finished it and gave it to my agent, we were at about 117,000 words. We cut it down to about 111,000 to give to my editor. And then in edits, there were a few things she wanted me to add or expand on, and so it kind of grew back up again.
That's amazing. So it is, I remember you telling me your writing process generally is at night, if I recall correctly.
For the most part.
Yeah, you can be found at 3 a.m. sitting there surrounded by research materials, tapping away at it. Has that changed at all?
I mean, I try to have a better work-life balance. I don't know how well I succeed, but I just kind of write in whatever snatches of time I get, especially now that the first book is on shelves. And, I went through that whole process with publicity while this book was already done. So my second book was actually already finished and into my editor by the time Checkmate published. So this time it's been a little different because Daughters of Victory we're moving into promo right now, and I'm just on the first edit of my third novel. I haven't sent it to my editor yet. My agent saw it, but I'm still doing a lot of the heavy editing. So that's been a harder balance because I'm just busier than I was last time. So I'm just writing in any snatch of time I can get.
It sounds to me like you lack work ethic.
Just a little.
I'm in the studio today. Gabriella Saab wrote a book that I read last year. I absolutely loved, called The Last Checkmate. Her next book comes out in mid-January, is that correct?
January 24th.
January 24th. It's called Daughters of Victory, female protagonist, historical fiction, a genre that is absolutely on fire these days, and this lady is sitting on top of it. When we come back from break, Gabriella, I want to talk to you about how much of you is in this new character or these new characters. It's a conversation we had about a year ago with the previous book. Sound good?
Sounds great.
You're listening to What's Working. What's Working was brought to you by the Alabama Center for Real Estate at the Culverhouse College of Business at the University of Alabama. Be right back. The Alabama Center for Real Estate, known as ACRE, strives every day to be a valued resource that supports and promotes Alabama's real estate industry and promotes economic and workforce development across the great state of Alabama. ACRE and Alabama, a championship collaboration. Get to know ACRE and learn more about their offerings and their events at their website, www.acre.culverhouse.ua.edu. My sponsor, Get the Tea, is having their annual holiday sale. You won't want to miss it. When you purchase 2 months of their tea, you'll get 1 month for free. It's available in 3 flavors: natural, peppermint, my favorite, or pomegranate. Save $35. Their teas and supplements are sourced from the purest ingredients available, especially this time of year when you'll be around so many cookies. You'll want to make sure that your digestive system is intact. So why not now? Don't take your health for granted. It's now o'clock. Go to getthetea.com, enter code CAM5, that's CAM5, to receive an additional $5 off your order. That's getthetea.com, code CAM5. We're back. You're listening to What's Working. In the studio today, Gabriella Saab is sitting across from me. I think if I could choose a profession and a career that would make me the proudest, it would be as a popular author. It's not in my cards, but I love being with them, hoping that some of their creativity will ooze across the table into me. You're listening to What's Working, by the way, brought to you by the Alabama Center for Real Estate, Culverhouse College of Business, University of Alabama. Gabriella, in the last book, you said there were pieces of the character that were you as you went along. What of these new characters is you in the new book?
Ooh, that's a good question. So the first character is Svetlana, as I mentioned earlier. She is probably the least like me out of the two. She is very just passionate about this cause, obsessed with this cause. During the revolution. So during the revolution, for those who don't know, in Russia, there were all these parties vying for power when the Tsar was overthrown. There were the Bolsheviks, there were the Mensheviks, and there was her party, which is called the Socialist Revolutionaries. And so, not to get too heavily into the weeds here, but basically, in a nutshell, the Socialist Revolutionaries wanted more of a democratic, socialist kind of government where people voted on their leaders, the wealthy and the poor had representation through this voting process, and everybody was essentially happy. Whereas in contrast, the Bolsheviks wanted only the workers in power, the lower classes, because they thought, the upper classes have been in power long enough. They don't need a say anymore. So there were all these different political factions just fighting with each other and fighting for control. And so my character gets very swept up into that. And she's very good at what she does. She's a sharpshooter and is very talented in that and is very arrogant about it. And is basically convinced that...
Sharpshooter, a weapon,
yes.
A gunner.
Yes.
Okay.
That's correct.
Okay.
So,
I want to make sure I understood the term correctly.
Yes. So she has this little pistol that she takes everywhere and relies on very heavily. And so she is very much tangled into all of these very complex things. She's got a complicated life, a complicated relationship, all these other things, and just has a one-track mind about this revolution. Versus, in contrast, her granddaughter, when we meet her, Mila is 18. She's from Leningrad, so big city, and is sent off to this little village to live with this grandmother that she doesn't know. All she really knows about her is that her mom doesn't like her. She doesn't know why. She doesn't know their history, anything there. And so she is just kind of a young woman, very much looking for her cause and for her place, and just kind of seeking that love and approval that we all kind of look for, especially at those ages. And she just doesn't have a great relationship with anyone in her family, and of course doesn't know this grandmother that she's going to live with. So it's a very hard time in her life, but she's also very headstrong in her own way. But I think a little more empathetic, not quite so prickly as her grandmother. And so I probably relate to her a little bit more. But again, she is very different from me as well, in that she also kind of throws herself into these passions in these ways like her grandmother does. And, of course, we all have our passions. I obviously throw myself into this writing thing. But I think I like to think I have a better sense of a healthy amount of, obsession, for lack of a better word, whereas these two just kind of go all in, and that's all they care about.
A healthy amount of obsession, as if there is such a thing.
Yeah, I don't know if that's technically a thing. But.
Yeah. So kind of piggybacking on the previous question of what of you is in this book, I was watching on a flight not long ago on the entertainment on the airlines. They have this program called Masterclass. Perhaps you've seen it advertised online, how to become a writer, how to be this, and it's so many different interesting things. I listened to a female author whose name I can't remember right now, but you recognize her books. And anyway, one of the things, and it's really interesting the way they do it, they make eye contact with the camera. Yeah, they're talking to you and me, not being interviewed. They're talking to you and me. And she said one of her early writing experiments when she was learning is that she had to write about a very near-death experience. Everybody seems to have something that they feel like was a near-death experience. And the teacher kept pushing them to get closer to that experience, closer, and to really write the visceral response of that thing. And then the teacher said, take the emotions from that experience and apply them to a character in one of your writings so that the character is going through that. And she said, this is the way, she said, the author, I develop creativity, as I remember something extremely passionate in my background, whatever it may be, and then I apply those emotions to one of my characters. Do you do something similar? Do you remember instances from your youth and say, gosh, I remember this so clearly, and this is the way it felt, and I'm going to apply that memory to what this character is experiencing in this scene?
That is very interesting. I like that. I guess not as with as much thought as you just described, but I would say yes, there have definitely been experiences and instances in my life that I have applied to my characters and to my stories. And kind of going back to this point about these two women and how obsessed they are with their causes, I feel like I definitely drew on some of that myself and just took it further because obviously I remember what it was like when I wrote my first little short story when I was 5 or 6 and had just read Nancy Drew and thought it was the coolest thing and wrote a little story and just was so in awe of that process and loved it so much. And so I took that and ran with it. So I definitely remember that feeling and kind of turned up the notch on that for these characters and these women who feel also very strongly about their positions in the world and in their causes, but then just push it further and further and further. So I think that is a very interesting and useful skill and way to look at things.
Yeah, I'm curious. You said in writing the first book there was a character in there that you felt like you wanted to tell their story. So there's somebody that has some historical connection to the event in The Last Checkmate. And then, as I read the promotional material in this book, there was something in doing the research for The Last Checkmate that led you to what ultimately became Daughters of Victory.
That is correct.
Female protagonist seems to be your genre. It's
Yes.
what you like so much. Is there a reason that are you trying to promote females? Are you saying this is what interests me? Is there a motive behind the female protagonist? Do you see yourself in that female protagonist? Is there a reason for that?
I think it's definitely that deeper personal connection, as you've said, because obviously as a woman, that's an experience I can relate to. But I also think just in terms of history, we haven't seen nearly as much of that as we have male protagonists in these stories. And obviously we still need them and need those stories. But there's just a lot of catching up to do in terms of the female stories. And so I think it's really important to dig into those. And then for the modern reader, that shows them that there were, plenty of women throughout history doing extraordinary things. We didn't just start, showing up in the picture in the recent years. It's always been, as same with the men. They've always been doing these amazing, extraordinarily brave and important types of work. So I think it's very interesting and fascinating, and it's fun for me to just find those stories and bring them to the modern reader.
Last book, you had a character named Kolb, Father Kolb.
Yes.
Is it Kolb or Colby? Kolbe.
Yes.
And he was a real person.
He was.
His history is told. He's a saint.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a similar character in this book where it is a historical figure that this is accurate detail on this person? You may have given him words or her words or something like that, but a true historical figure.
There's one particular character and then a couple that are inspired by people. So the one real character, her name is Fanya Kaplan. She was a revolutionary who is rumored to have attempted to assassinate Lenin. We don't really know if that's true or not. There's a lot of conflicting evidence. But she is my main character, Svetlana's friend. They're political prisoners together and just kind of go through all of this together. And so a lot of her story I tried to incorporate as accurately as possible. So Fanya's in there as a side character, and Svetlana's character is modeled off of Fanya Kaplan and then another revolutionary at the time named Vera Feiner, who was an aristocrat who left the aristocracy to join the resistance, join the revolution, just like my character does. So Svetlana's kind of a blend of the two. And then in the other timeline, as I was researching The Last Checkmate, I discovered a young Soviet girl named Zina Portnova. She lived in this little village in Belarus where my character finds herself during the war. And Xena infiltrated the local Nazi garrison to poison the Nazis.
No kidding.
Yeah, so Mila is very much inspired by her. And there's kind of another side character in the resistance group that she joins that was the leader, who is also in the book as well.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So you find these people, you tell their story a little bit.
Exactly.
I was sitting with he's a television producer, and we were talking about writing, the little writing that I do. He does some writing as well. And I said, one of my challenges with my writing is never knowing when I'm finished. Do you feel the same problem?
In a sense, I think it's definitely hard to know when to stop because we'll keep editing forever.
Yeah.
But you try to find that natural point where you feel content, I suppose.
Never perfect, but
Never
good
perfect.
enough.
That's right.
When we come back from break, I want to talk more about you, how your world has changed since these books have come out, how your agents perhaps are treating you differently. If you've noticed that, they'll take your calls now, whereas in the past you had to leave a voicemail or something like that. Just what's happened to you personally since the first book has come out and been so successful, and since the second one is now being promoted so strongly. Obviously, your publishers see something there, and let's talk about what that looks like for you on a day-to-day basis. You're listening to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston. In the studio, Gabriella Saab, an author. First book was called The Last Checkmate. Second book is sitting in front of me, Daughters of Victory, to be released mid-January. I thought I saw, Gabriella, you can pre-order it online?
You can, absolutely.
It's a great Christmas gift, folks, is a pre-ordered copy of Gabriella's book. What's Working is brought to you by the Alabama Center for Real Estate, Culver House College of Business, University of Alabama.
This is Trey Langus with Transworld Business Advisors. You've worked for years to grow and build your business, and now you're considering an exit strategy. Selling your business can be intimidating and complex. Let our local team at Transworld Business Advisors help you. We are the largest business brokerage in the world, and I will personally and confidentially guide you through this process. I'm Trey Langus. Find me at Transworld Business Advisors or Google my name.
Customer service never goes out of style. In fact, I think it's safe to say that customer service is more valuable and more important now more than ever. Hi, this is Cam Marston. One thing that my over 200 episodes of What's Working has taught me is how important customer service is to building and maintaining a thriving business. It's the growing need for customer service that's led me to partner with one of the state's leading customer service trainers to create our program called Delivering 5-Star Customer Service. Your team will get one 90-minute training session per month for 6 consecutive months. Each session builds on the skills learned the previous month, allowing your customer-facing teams to practice before moving on to the next lesson. And the 6 lessons address everything from appearance to electronic communications to conflict resolution to maintaining a service mindset. Our program travels and is delivered in person at your workplace, nothing virtual. You simply can't practice the level of the skills this course teaches virtually. For more information, email me, cam@cammarston.com, and let's schedule a time to talk. Remember, you have less to fear from outside competition than you do from discourtesy and bad service from inside your own company. Again, email me, cam@cammarston.com, and let's talk about your business. We're back in the studio. Gabriella Saab is sitting across from me. Her forthcoming book is called Daughters of Victory. The previous book, The Last Checkmate. I've read The Last Checkmate. I told Gabriella I hadn't quite got into Daughters of Victory yet. But The Last Checkmate had me from the opening sentence to the very last. Ended up reading it in a cab in Los Angeles. I think I may have told you this, and told the cab driver, please don't talk to me. I'm trying to finish this book. I was just an awful, awful guest to that cab driver. What's Working is brought to you by the Alabama Center for Real Estate at the Culver House College of Business at the University of Alabama. So let's talk about you and how your world has changed since the first book came out. Let's begin this way, and this is a ridiculous way of starting it, but it's one that always makes me smile. What would your parents say you do?
I think they'd say I'm a writer, an author, and still a bar teacher. So in that sense, neither profession has changed. I feel like at the core, I'm still kind of me. The fame hasn't gone to my head or anything like that. So I think they would say she's a writer and a bar instructor.
So there's a long-standing joke. Dad, when I grow up, I want to be a musician. The father says, I'm sorry, son, you can't have them both. And that is obviously not your case. You're making your own way with your writing and stuff like that. How have your friends changed? Are they treating you differently? Have you noticed any changes around that? Are they very proud to introduce you to their friends and stuff like this?
Honestly, my core group of close friends, they've always been the same. They've always been fantastic, wonderful, very genuine people. So that has not really changed, although, of course, many of them have read my book and have reached out to me and, said that they enjoyed it, they were impressed, all these other things. So that's always nice and feels good because, you want your friends and family to love it. So that's been great, but it really has been wonderful just how many people in the community have reached out to me, and people who I thought, had no clue who I was or, whatever it was, would reach out and say they read the book or, see me in person at some point and say hi. And so I feel like that has been great. It's kind of opened me up to more connections with other people that I may not have necessarily fostered those relationships with before.
Do you enjoy that, or is it just a part of the job?
It's both. Obviously it's part of the job, but it is something I enjoy. I love connecting with the readers and the people in person or online or whatever it happens to be.
Tell me about the review you got from either Daughters of Victory or The Last Checkmate that made you go, oh my gosh, that it was the reviewer perhaps was someone that you knew, or the words that they chose was something that maybe you hoped someone would someday say about your writing.
Oh my goodness. Well, there's one review from The Last Checkmate that really stuck with me. So this person wrote to me and said, I live in Canada. I picked up your book and I was reading and I noticed this little reference you had to a woman in the clothing detail who participated in this prisoner uprising. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And I kept reading and realized it was the woman that you were referring to that I assumed you were referring to. In your author's note, you mentioned that. That woman was part of this rebellion and was caught and hung for it. Was one of the last women killed in Auschwitz for resistance, for smuggling gunpowder for this resistance, or this uprising that the prisoners staged. And that person who wrote to me said, that woman you mentioned was my father-in-law's sister.
No kidding.
Isn't that crazy?
No
and
kidding.
He said, I can't wait to show this to my wife. She's going to be so honored that you included this person from her family just in this little way in your story. So it's stuff like that that just makes me just sit back and go, it's all worth it,
Yeah. So getting the glowing reviews from XYZ Book Review and stuff like that, it's nice to see.
Right.
But it's the personal connections from a reader that truly stand out to you.
It really is. Obviously the trade reviews are important. The good reviews are important. But when it's the other authors, if they enjoy my book, that means a lot to me because obviously I respect them and respect their work. And so if they approve, that feels like a great stamp of approval, but then it's definitely the readers who find something to connect to that resonates with them.
Your social media shows you hanging out with other authors, other genres, not... What is it called? Historical fiction genre writers.
Right.
Tell me about some of them and how you got hooked up with them. Is that a publisher effort or is that something you did on your own?
It can be both. For me, most of the authors I've connected with have been just myself personally. So there's actually a big community of us on Twitter. A lot of us went to Twitter because a lot of editors and agents hang out there and kind of post what they're looking for and things like that. And so people who are trying to, get an agent or get published jump on Twitter and connect with each other and find beta readers and people to critique their work or people at similar stages of the process as them. And so that's where I connected with a lot of my writer friends kind of before any of us had gone anywhere. We were all just aspiring historical authors. And a couple of my friends and I run a group called HF Chit Chat, which is a Twitter community where we basically host a chat every month and people, all historical and historical subgenres, can join, and we talk about our work or we talk about a particular topic of historical fiction, and so kind of connect with each other in that way. And so all the ones that I've gotten close to have been through that. And my critique partner is a fellow author named Alicia Salnikova-Gilmore, whose debut just released called The Witch and the Tsar. It is a historical fantasy about the Slavic witch Baba Yaga.
Oh, it's a historical fantasy. This is a genre I don't know anything about.
It's intense. Yeah, she did a lot of heavy lifting, but she is originally from Moscow, Russia, and so immigrated here as a child. And so she was an absolute godsend for my novel Daughters of Victory, because we had started to kind of become friends at that point. We'd gotten to know each other a little bit and realized we worked very well together. And so I reached out to her and about this idea in the first place and said, do you think this makes any sense? Can I even do this? If I do, can you help me in terms of culture? And she was like, yeah, absolutely. And so she was just everything this book needed and just pointed out things I never would have known, not being a Russian, not having been to Russia. I couldn't go because of COVID. And she's gone, countless times throughout her life. So she could help me in terms of just the environment and then just the culture and the language and all those very important details.
So trading tweets, perhaps trading emails, trading texts. Have you met these people? Have you sat down together?
Finally, yes. So Alicia and I were friends for 3 years before we got to meet in person this past August. And I've been up to visit her. She lives in Chicago a few times. And then me and her and a couple of our other author friends from Twitter all got together outside of Chicago for an event recently. So I got to meet them in person. And those are really the only ones I've met in person so far, other than, authors who come through Page and Palette. That's about all I've gotten to do.
So when you meet these they were all female ladies outside of Chicago. You said it was for an event. I assume you guys were talking about writing or signing books or something like that. At some point, all the guests, the tourists, the customers have to leave and just leaves the 3, 4, 5 of you together. What do you talk about?
We talk about writing and about publishing and about life and everything. So we talk about our woes and our highs and just, girl talk, that sort of thing.
So it's interesting to me that you talk shop.
Yes.
I guess it's not interesting to me that you talk shop all at the same time. Do you all share publishers? Do you all have the same publisher?
So in that group that I was in Chicago with, 2 of them have the same editor and publishing house. They're young adult historical authors, and the rest of us are all different.
Do you, how has your relationship with your publisher changed?
Oh, gosh, they have been so wonderful and so fantastic. And so I was a big fan of theirs even before I signed with them. My publisher's William Morrow, which is an imprint of HarperCollins, and I read all their authors, so many wonderful authors, many of whom work with my editor. And so that first process with The Last Checkmate was just wonderful. And since then, we've just kind of maintained a great rapport, which has been amazing. Because you never know going from book to book, is this one going to do well just because the first one did well? Are they necessarily going to want this one? And this one's going to, perform differently because not every book is the same. Not every book is going to appeal to the same audience. So it was a little worrisome in that regard because you just don't really know what to expect. But my editor has been fantastic and supportive, and my whole support staff has been just absolutely wonderful.
Have you been to their offices?
Not yet. I am trying to figure out when I can go up to New York to finally, sit down and have lunch and run around through the HarperCollins building like I've always wanted to do.
I went to the National Geographic building in Washington, D.C. one time, expecting lions and monkeys and everything, roaming the halls. Yeah. It looks like an office building with lots of offices and cubes and big computer screens for high resolution pictures, but it wasn't quite the sexy place that I had hoped it would be.
Let down.
Yeah, I know. And I suppose you're thinking of going to the publisher's office and having all these famous artists authors sitting around just waiting to meet you, and it's probably going to look like an office with a bunch of cubes.
Yeah, maybe a few books here and there.
That's right. So maybe some books here and there. Does the publisher tell you what they expect from you when they say, all right, you got another one coming, I need it ended by this date, and I expect that it will sell blank copies?
So it depends on the process. Yes and no. For mine, we had a deadline for edits after the book was sold. So I didn't have a deadline for when I needed to get the manuscript into them. So as I said, I was fortunate in that all through lockdown, I got to write Daughters of Victory because I wasn't doing anything else. And so that put me very much ahead of the curve by the time The Last Checkmate got off the ground because I had a book done already. So I sent it into them. They gave me a deadline for edits, but after that, they've kind of let me do my thing. In other cases, they will say, okay, we need the new project by this point. So I think once you get to be a little more higher up the hierarchy, that's kind of when it turns to that versus take your time.
Yeah, yeah. You've got another book you said nearly complete. I want to ask you about that. Well, let's go ahead. Tell me about the next one that's on the burner.
So the next one is a little bit of a departure from what I've done previously. So my third novel is very much inspired by my family history. So my dad's parents were first-generation Lebanese Americans who both served in World War II. and met after the war. He was from a little town in Mississippi called Canton, and she was from a town in New York called Olean. And so they courted back and forth for a few months and saved all their letters. And so my dad gave those to me. And so I was reading through their letters and their story and wanted to write something inspired by that. So my third novel is set post-war through about the 1960s. And it follows a young woman who has just been discharged from the Navy Waves, as my grandmother was. And so that storyline is very similar to my grandparents' storyline. And then there's another point of view character who is the male love interest's older sister, who is an actual immigrant from Lebanon. So both characters are Lebanese Americans, and the story takes place in the Deep South.
So you're writing, you don't have to travel for this one.
I don't. I've been to Canton a time or two, so it's all right.
That's very exciting. I was going to ask you, you would seem to be well positioned to write a biography after the extraordinary amount of research that you do on these people, that you could pick one of these characters and say, this lady needs her story told, not just from the historical fiction point of view, but needs her story told. Any interest in nonfiction?
Ooh, I haven't really considered it. I love the freedom I get in fiction. So I never say never with nonfiction, but I like getting to throw in what I want to do here and there.
Yeah. To be, I use air quotes here, to be God.
That's right.
And to direct these characters' lives.
Exactly.
Gabriella, thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Good to have you back, and hopefully we can get you back again when we talk about this next book, which takes place in this part of the country. Gabriella Saab is sitting across from me. I respect and admire and am grateful for her willingness to come here and talk about this. Her book, released in mid-January, is called Daughters of Victory. It will be out January 24th, I think.
January 24th.
You can pre-order it online. It makes a great, wonderful Christmas gift. Let's help this Alabama lady out as much as we can. Thank you again.
Thank you so much.
You're listening to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston. We'll be back for segment 5 after this break to recap and tell you what we got upcoming. What's Working is brought to you by the Alabama Center for Real Estate, Culver House College of Business, all housed at the University of Alabama. The Alabama Center for Real Estate, better known as ACRE, housed at the University of Alabama's Culver House College of Business, is committed to industry engagement and dedicated to shaping the future of real estate through excellence in teaching, research, and service to drive economic and workforce development in Alabama. ACRE and Alabama, a championship collaboration. Learn more at www.acre.culverhouse.ua.edu.
Hi, I'm Chef Jewel at Fairhope Chocolate. When I'm not creating the best couverture chocolate creations south of the Mason-Dixon line, I'm listening to What's Working with Cam Marston. Now, back to the show.
The image I have of a professional writer is one from the way back. It's perhaps modeled by the Hemingway ideal or something like that. Anyway, disheveled, extraordinarily creative, live a life of impulse. There's a burning cigarette between their fingers all the time. There's an open bottle of whiskey within reach at all the time. And they sit down and they grind, they throw themselves into the work in order to create this masterpiece of fiction or nonfiction, whatever it may be. That's not Gabriella at all. The woman is extraordinary, prepared, disciplined, thoughtful. She's got a system. She works the system. And I think my stereotype of what professional writers should be like is absolutely just that, a stereotype. It has nothing to do with accuracy. Meet Gabriella Saab if you ever want to disprove that stereotype, as she did with me again just now in the studio. We're back. You're listening to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston. What's Working is brought to you by the Alabama Center for Real Estate, housed in the Culver House College of Business at the University of Alabama. Gabriella's book, again, will be released in mid-January. It's available for pre-order. I wish we could have sold some or given some away through the show, but it's simply not out there yet. However, it's going to be a wonderful book like the previous one. The early reviews, which I've been given copies of to prepare for this conversation, are all just as powerful as the reviews for the previous book was. If this is your gig, if this is your genre, if you know anybody who enjoys that genre, do us all a favor and pick one of our books and pre-order it for Gabriella. That would be great. Anyway, time to plug what we got upcoming. I think next week, if my calendar is correct in my mind, we've got Jim Cox coming. We call it the annual Wine and Spirits Trends Show, so that you can be aware of what's trending in the wine world as you buy stuff, perhaps for your holidays. In truth, it's known as the Great Wine Boondoggle, and we will be in the studio recording that, and you'll hear the sound, the lovely sound of corks coming out of wine as we try this type of stuff and talk about wine. So look forward to that. What's Working is produced by John Thompson with Eye on Digital. Thanks to John. Every time I say that is a day he can't spend a day on his boat drinking beer on the north side of Horn Island. He's getting used to that now. All right, we'll have another show next week. Have a good week, everybody.